With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Peiches. We will continue to learn about the uniqueness of Bavel and about the compassion that Hashem has on us, even when we go into Golus. We will also learn the Chazal that Godol Kibbutz Golius Kiyom Shenivra B'Shamayim V'Aretz. Wow, that the day that Hashem will gather the exiles, the coming of Mashiach will be just as great as the day that Hashem created the heavens and the earth, as we'll explain it al pi Chasidus when we learn the Gemara. And then we're going to come back to Masechtas Pesachim, and we're going to be learning about a person who's able to register a Pesach for his minor children and for his Eved. We're speaking about an Eved Kanani or Shivcha Kananis, even against their will. The Gemara is going to clarify how when it comes to a wife, how exactly does a husband or should a husband register the wife for the Korban Pesach. We're going to learn the case that we had in the Mishnah regarding an Evet Kanani that has two masters. We're going to learn how Beis Hillel changed their opinion and they agreed at the end. They acquiesced to Beis Shammai regarding the Chatzi Evet, the Chatzi Ben Choyren. And on Daf Peiches Amud Beis, we're going to learn a new Mishnah regarding someone, firstly, who tells his Evet, Choyt Olayas HaPesach, and the person did not specify to his Evet whether they should purchase a lamb or a kid, right, a tli, or a tleh, or a gedi. Then we're going to learn a scenario where the person did specify which one of these two animal types, but the Evet forgot. Then we're going to learn a case where the master later also forgot, and ultimately that's going to create a scenario where the master, where the person has a suffix whether they fulfilled Pesach Rishon or not. And we're going to learn that even though there is such a suffix in a certain scenario, the Pesach Sheni will not be able to be brought, even though the person might have not fulfilled the Pesach Rishon, and much, much more. Chavra, let us start on Daf Pei Zayin Amud Beis, all the way in the bottom of the Amid. Ula Amar, says Ula, that the reason, or another reason, why Hashem initially sent us Dafka to Bavel and Golus is Kadesha Yoichlu Daf Peiches to Marim, in order for us to be able to eat dates. And as Rashi writes, that the land of Bavel, which includes some of Iraq, some of Iran, is blessed by Hashem with it producing an abundance of dates. And dates, but Gemara and Ksubas tell us that dates satiate, that dates warm the body, that dates loosen the bowels, that dates provide energy. In other words, people can live a lot substantially of dates, and there's abundance of it in order for for us to have freed up time, which a Yid will use for the learning of Torah. And on that, the Gemara tells us a story that Ula Iklala Pumpadis, Ula once traveled to Pumpadisa, and Kirivule Tirina the Tamri, they brought for him a basket of dates. And Amar Lahu, when he sees such an abundance of dates, he says, Kama Kihani Bizuza, how many Zuzim do I have to pay? So they told him, no, it's not how many Zuzim do you have to pay for one basket. There's such an abundance of dates. It's so inexpensive. Amrulay, 3 baskets for only 1 Zuz. Baskets for 1 Zuz, to last Bezuza. So to which Ula responded, Amar, that Meloit Sana the Dufsha Bezuza, that a basket full of honey, he's using the word honey in reference to dates, that you can get so much honey for such little money, and they don't learn even more than they are learning. Now the Yidden in Babel learned a lot of Torah, but he felt that they should have had even more freed up time to learn Torah. So he said a word of critique against the Jewish people. So what happened? That Balayla at night, Sa'aru, we just mentioned from Ksubas Daf Yud, that dates, they loosen the bowels. Now, maybe if you have too many dates, or maybe if the dates are even better quality, it does more than just loosening the bowels. He had diarrhea, and he was unable to rest. So there he changed his critique into words of praise. So Aman, and he says that I'm living in a location that for 1 zuz you can buy a basket of poison. In other words, the inexpensive food is very damaging, which means that to get food that doesn't damage you, those other foods were more expensive. That would demand of Yidden more time to go to work, but they don't work that much, right? And yet, so he changed Same scenario, instead of looking at things in a way in which he critiqued the Jewish people, he saw things from another perspective, and he complimented the Jewish people. And this is also for sure behemshech to this whole sugya of Hosea, how Hosea was understood later when he reached a higher level, how important it is actually to look at things in a positive light and dafka to speak out words of praise, especially regarding a community, regarding the Yidden there that lived above. Now the Gemara continues, Ve Amar Rabbi Elazar. Now the Vav is because we had yesterday in Daf Pei Zayin various statements of Rabbi Elazar. I just want to quote one of them again, that Rabbi Elazar says that Lo Higla HaKadosh Baruch Hu Es Yisrael Lebein Ha'umayis Ela Kadei Sheyitois V'Aleim Geidim. And as Chassidus explains, Geidim is not only referring to the people, that also, but there are sparks of holiness, and only when a Yid in that location, dafka through an avodah of bittul, dafka when there are challenges, overcomes them, and is megala elikus. So a torch, hayom yom, attracts, a fire attracts. So fire attracts godliness, and we add into the sparks of kedusha. So on that note, v'amar Rabbi Elazar ma'idich siv, that v'holchu amim rabim, that many nations will come, v'amru, and they will say that l'chu, let us go, v'nala el har Hashem, let us go up to the mountain of God. This is in the future when everyone will see the greatness of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Beis HaMikdash indeed will be a Beis Tefilla l'chol ha'amim, even though parenthetically the Goyim won't be allowed to go into all of the areas of the Beis HaMikdash, but they'll be able to come up quite close. And they're going to say, how will they refer to the Beis HaMikdash? El Beis, to the house of the God of Yaakov v'Goyim. So asks the Gemara over here, like, hey, Yaakov, why are they only calling the Beis HaMikdash the house of the God of Jacob? Like, hey, Avram v'Yitzchak. Interestingly, yesterday we quoted the Gemara Shabbos Peites. We spoke about the greatness of Yitzchak. Now we'll speak about the greatness of Yaakov. Elom. And how many Maimonic Hasidus do we have on this Chazal? Elo loik Avram shekosov bayhar. Avram Avinu referred to the place of the Beis HaMikdash as God's mountain, as it says by the Akedah, Asher Yei Omar Hayoim Bahar Hashem Yei Ra, on the mountain in which Hashem is seen. No, Hashem is seen on the mountain. As it says, Yitzchak, Losuach means to converse, but it means to pray, as we know from Brachas. Losuach, but we're Basada. So there's a mountain, there's a field, Elaki Yaakov, Shekaroi Bayis. Yaakov Avinu refers to the place of the Holy Temple and to the Beis HaMikdash as a home. As it says, Vayikra, Eshem Hamokim Ahu, Beis Kale. And as Chassidus explains, that reaching God when you leave this world is easier, but that's not the kavanah. So you begin by only being able to touch God when you lift yourself completely above Olam Haza. You go on a mountain. Then after the next generation, Yitzchak Avinu, godliness was already coming closer to the world. You didn't have to go up on that mountain, but you needed still to remove yourself from the city. Yaakov ultimately brought out the kavanah that even when you are in your home, that you got to bring the Shekhinah down over here, and that's the ultimate kavanah. Gewaldig. And that's going to happen when? That's going to happen in the future. And that's vital, like we mentioned, connected to the Amar Rabbi Elazar, that dafka when Yidden went out into the world, did we bring God to every place in the world. And Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, excuse me, now that we're speaking about that which will happen when Mashiach will come, that Godel Kibbutz Goliath Kiyom Shenivru Boy Shemayim V'Aretz, that the day of the ingathering of the exiles is going to be just as great, just as momentous as the day that God created the heavens and the earth. And this is Meduyak B'Yosef. As we know that the real B'riya Yesh Me'ayin was on the day number 1, as the Ramban writes. And afterwards, then God took that which existed, and then there was Yitzira. Then it was formed. But the ex nihilo, so to say, the Yesh Me'ayin was on the first day, as we'll mention in a moment. And that is what will happen on the day of Kibbutz Golus. As it says, V'nikbutzu b'nei Yehuda u'b'nei Yisrael yachdav, unlike since the days of the child of Shlomo HaMelech, where we were divided, that both the b'nei Yehuda and the b'nei Yisrael will all gather together. For some lehem roish echad, they're going to have one leader. And dafka from the house of David HaMelech, there's going to be one Rebbe. And v'olu min ha'aretz, and we will all get up. We will have an elevation from the earthliness. And then it says, Ki gadol yoim Yisrael, a great Great is the day of planting. Oh, also another chazal that we learned yesterday, that us being put into galus is keilu uzeratia liba aretz, we learned yesterday, as the Alter Rebbe explains in so many Maimorim, that a yid in galus is planted in the ground, because when you plant one cord, you plant a yid, it's in order to add a lot more godliness through the bittul that happens in galus. Hashem is going to replant us back in the Holy Land. Now that, so you see that over here we refer to the word of ingathering. The Torah uses the word yoim in Hosea, and it says Vayir Vayboker yoim. But which pasuk are we quoting? Yoim echad. And if you remember Chumash Rashi Chitas, why does it not say yoim rishon? Because the next day is Sheni. When you are counting numbers 1, 2, 3, 4 in Lashon HaKodesh, when you say 2, 3, 4, the first one is called number 1. Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi. Echad is not one of a group. And says Rashi, in other words, that on Yom Echad, we didn't notice a world yet. God was so present, and that was the light that reveals the source, that all you saw is God. The concept that Atzmus itself will be revealed when Mashiach will come and the Yom Kibbutz Golius, the highest level of Gilui Elikus, is not in the beginning of creation, where there was never a potential, because there was a potential for it to be concealed. In the days of Kibbutz Golius, dafke because of Golus, and the positive way of looking at Golus, not as a punishment, but as a hachana for the Gilui Elikus in the times of Mashiach, will be taka reach the moment, as we mentioned over here, that we're going to call the Beis Hamikdash Beis Kale. We're going to see the world, and in the house, and in this Olam Hazeh, we're going to see the essence of the Eibishter. All right, beautiful. And now we come back to the dinim that we are learning. So the Mishnah that we began with, the 8th Perek yesterday, was based on the following rules. Rule number 1. First of all, every Yid has to be registered on a Koren Pesach. I just want to make something clear, that there is really a machlokes rishonim exactly how technically did you make that registration. According to Rashi, it's mashma that a kinyan needed to be made. No, it's not. According to the Rambam, it's mashma that just a verbal registration was enough. So be that as it may, you needed to register. Now, can I on my own decide, oh, you're my friend, I want to register you on my Pesach? No, if you didn't tell me that you want to be registered, I cannot represent you, because maybe you want to be registered on another Koren Pesach. But however, we learned that a wife, we're going to clarify more details now, the default, the stam is that she wants to eat with her husband. But even a wife, if we know that she does not want to be part of his group, she tells him not to do so, or she does something that indicates she doesn't want to be part of his group, or if she herself registered herself on another group, then the husband cannot register the wife. However, when it comes to minor children, or when it comes to Eved or Shivcha Kananim, there the master, so to say, can register them even if it's against their will, because they are halachically the master's property. Good. Now, one of the details that the Mishnah spoke about was a minor orphan. That's how we learned the Pshat. The Yasam refers to a minor orphan. And not only does he have one apitropis, but for whatever reason, there are 2 people that took responsibility for this Yasam, and each one of these administrators decided to register the orphan on their Korban Pesach. So the question is, what happens? You cannot be registered on 2 Korbanos. So the Mishnah says that the Yasam gets to choose which one will he eat from. Says the Gemara, again, Yasam Shishach Api Trupsin, he gets to choose. So again, this is really a question. So Shamat Mino, why don't we prove from our Mishnah regarding the Shas question, whether there is this halachic concept of Bereda, retroactive clarification or not? Here you have to have the Bereda, because if you're not going to use this concept of retro when he decides with whom to eat, that retroactively makes it that he consented for that one. You have to be registered prior to the shechita. Here, he's only making his choice much later. So does that not prove yesh bereda? So interestingly, yesterday when we had that kasha, the Gemara had no option other than in the case of the wife, that it must mean that she chose before the shechita. Here we don't need to say that. Here we can say that he gets to choose before he eats it. Amar Abzeda, since it says on Parshas by the word Sela Boyes, a lamb for a household, and that means Mikol Makaim. Mikamaka means, this is Gavaldik. I just want to clarify like this. When you have two choices, and you could eat with one apitrupas or with another apitrupas, and the Yasim is saying he wants to have it with Reuven and not with Shimon. What exactly is he doing? When he makes that statement, I want to eat it with Shimon, is he now retroactively creating registration with Shimon? Or we can say pshat, that since one lamb is brought for a whole group, and that includes for the minors, which means every apitrupas rightfully registered the child, this yasim, on their carbon, he was registered onto. All the yasim needs to do is he has to nullify the registration of one. When you nullify the registration, and that can go retroactively, or that doesn't even have to go retroactively, that can go mikano lahaba. You can't be currently registered on two karbanos, so nullify of one, it's gavaldik, and therefore automatically the one that you did not nullify was there from the beginning. Because Sela Boyes teaches us, especially when it comes to minors, that they are automatically included in the household. So he was taka registered on both. You don't have to retroactively, you only have to make sure that now he's not registered on two. So nullify one. He can nullify one by saying, I want to be with Shimon, not with Reuven. So that nullified his connection to the Reuven. But there is no retroactive registration happening, so you cannot prove Yesh B'Redom. So learns the Sfasem is Pshat in the Gemara. Says the Gemara. Tanach Rabbanan we learned in the Brais. The pasuk of Sela Boyes. Sela Boyes means when it comes, I'll tell you more, Sela Boyes doesn't only mean one animal for the whole household. It means you don't need their consent because they're minors. They are automatically included. This Mikol Makim. So Malamed says the Braisa, Sha'ada maybe you sheikh Aliyah b'nayu b'tei aktanim, that when a person brings a Korban Pesach, automatically who's included? One's minor sons and daughters. Likewise, va'aliyah avlei v'shivchasi aktanim, if a person owns slaves, so that they are automatically included, and automatically means bein midaton, bein shaloi midaton. Unlike a wife, here, even if they explicitly said, I don't want to be part, they don't have a say in that. They're minors or they are avad. Avol, however, in contrast, there you need to have consent. And what we will have to clarify, as we will until the two dots, what pshat you need to have consent. Doesn't mean you have to have explicit consent. Or, as we will conclude, as we learn properly the Mishnah, you don't have to have explicit consent, especially by the wife. You can presume that she is consenting. And that presumption is halachically enough of a consent. When it comes to minors or to avodim kananim, you don't need their consent. Sela Boyes means that they are automatically included. When it comes to the adults, you need to have their consent. The only question will be, do they have to explicitly consent, or is there a halacha of stama is like consent? That is going to be that we will have to work out. So Tanya Idich, we learned in another Braisa. This is a Tosefta. The order is the opposite. You can only include them elamidaton. Avol, however, and over there again, bein midaton, bein shalom. And now adds this second Braisa, adds this Tosefta v'kulan sheshachatu, that if they made their own Korban Pesach, however they did that, whether they made their own animal, whether they joined clearly another group, and also v'shachat rabban aleyen, yoitzin b'shal rabban ve'eno yoitzin b'shal atzmon. This is going to the latter clause, that by the minors, again, if, like we said, we don't need their consent, so if they joined another group, doesn't matter, they are included in their fathers, in their masters. But here, because the Braisa separating the ishtoi, chutz min ha'isha she'yachayla limchais. And we got a problem, because in this Tosefta, like we had before, there's two groups. One group were the minors and the avadim kananim, and the other group was b'noyu bitay hagdoilim, right, Eved Ivri, and the wife. It's all one group from which you always have to have their consent. So the Gemara wants to know, when the Braisa concludes, Chutz min ha'isha sheyichayla limchos, Maishna isha, why did the Braisa at the end separate the wife from the evidivity, from the adults? All of them, they should be able to be moicha. So enachanami, Omar Rava, that the chutz, the last line of the Tosefta, guys, we are in the first white line, doesn't only refer that the wife is able to protest, and therefore if she wants to have her own, or she wants to join another group, that's how it's going to be. But it means isha v'chol the damila, all the others that from whom we require their consent, as we do from the wife. Now hold on. Says the Gemara, Haguf Akasha. Haguf Akasha is, let's look at the Braisa, at this Tosefta. Amrat chutz min ha'isha sheyechoyla limchos. We're not challenging Rava. We're accepting Rava's pshat. But what does that mean? That she is able to make a macha. Kama demachi. That l'chayda means that if she makes her protest, she doesn't want to be part of her husband's group, then it's effective. But that would imply halei machi. If she doesn't protest, she never explicitly consented either. Stama nafka b'shalbayla. However, v'haktani reisha, but go in the beginning. In the first clause, v'lo yalidei ishtoi ela midatan. That means you need to have their explicit consent, which would again imply hastama loy nafka. So make up your mind. How do we view stama? So the Gemara clarifies that the reisha, when it says midaton, elam midaton, the reisha doesn't mean that they have to say yes. Midaton means if they say yes, if they don't say no, it also means a yes. Ela b'stama. La'fuke echad ha'amar loy. Says the Gemara, hold on, not so quick. When it says regarding the minor children, that kulam sheshachatu b'shachat rabban aleim, if they had their own and their master maid included them, so here they are yotzin b'shal rabban. Here they are yotzin. Now, what did they do over here? When they joined another group, that is a protest, right? Or no, I'm sorry, it doesn't say that they protested. The Havamina is predicated on they never protested. And yet, so we're going to call that stama. And nevertheless, by stama, they belong to their master. If a minor by stama belongs to their master, and we are contrasting the minor with the adult, with the wife, that would mean, right? That stama, they belong on their own. Not stama, they belong with their husband. So it says the Gemara, no. That when it says that if the minor shechted for himself, he still belongs to the master, a minor making his own carbon is a protest. Protesting is not a verbal protest. Actually, an action of protest is much greater than a verbal protest. So it fits. So when there is a protest from a minor, his protest doesn't affect anything. When a wife protests and she says, I don't want to belong to my husband's carbon, either verbally or certainly if she joins another group, then her macha is effective. But by stama, we presume that the wife wants to eat with her husband. Okay, beautiful. 2 dots. The next case that the Mishnah spoke about was about an Evet Kanani that belongs to 2 masters. Now, when we learned the Mishnah, we learned it with Rashi. The Mishnah says that if an Evet Kanani belongs to 2 masters, if each one had him in mind, he cannot eat of neither. He's out. Why is he out? Because each master only owns half of him. So on master number 1, on Reuven's carbon Pesach, half of the Evet was not registered, the half that belonged to the other. Same thing with the other. So the tzad that was not registered, it's all on the same person, does not allow him to eat. However, we learned in Rashi another detail. This isn't only true when both registered him. What happens if only one registered him? Same thing. However, Rashi wrote, there is a solution. The solution is that the masters should agree with each other. One should tell the other, I allow you to register my half on your carbon Pesach. Then he'll be allowed to eat from that carbon Pesach. However, says the Gemara, that Rami laid of Eino Sava, Rav Eino Sava pointed out the following contradiction. Whom did he ask it to Rav Nachman? Tanan, it says in our Mishnah, Evet shel shnei shutvim, lo yoichel mishal shneim. He may not eat from neither. But it says in a Braisa, Rotzim is oichel, Rotzim is oichel. He can eat from either one. Mamash punkt fakert. So Amalei, so Rav Nachman tells Rav Eino Savam, you great Jew, you elder, V'amrila, or he gave him the compliment, known as Pasio Koma, you black vessel. By the way, that's a compliment. Sometimes they didn't speak complimentary. Here it's a compliment. A black vessel was the people that mamish learned day and night, became so removed from Olam Haza, is that they had a dark complexion. They didn't take care of themselves well. And they were called black vessels. The guys that were completely mufshad from Olam Haza. Or, Al Pi Chasidus, there's the light of the Torah, the Kabbalah of the Torah, then the Nigel of the Torah is the black part of the Torah, the Achoraim. And the people that occupied themselves learning Torah Shabbat Peh Halachos, they were called Pasya Koma, like Moshe Rabbeinu married the black woman. Coming back over here. So he tells them, here's that you have a great question. But mini uminach, between me and you, this time Shemaitza will clarify this. And that is like this. Our Mishnah is speaking about two owners that are makbid one on the other. And therefore they have no connection one to the other. So unless, like we learned Tanashi in the Mishnah, one asks of the other, listen here, if I'm making the Pesach for the Eved, allow your part, allow me to include that part. At least let the Eved eat. But if they didn't make that up explicitly, if the two different owners don't like each other, or they have no relationship with each other, they never want to benefit, have no shaykhs with each other, so then we cannot presume that one gave reshus to the other. I only own half, you only own the other half. I can only include the half that I own. Why would we say that stama, your half was included in mine? But I saw the loikapti yadodi. If they're not makbid on each other, then each one is thinking about the other. Each one is allowing the other to include his half on the other carbon Pesach. Now, 1 second. Now, what's going to happen according to the Braisa? It's going to be like the Yosem that has two apitrupasim. Because now, again, no one can be registered when they eat a carbon Pesach on two different carbonas. But as we learned Pshat over there from Sfas Emes, if one was registered on two, not because of Breira, then he'll have to choose. The slave will have to choose with which group he'll have to eat. And that choice won't create a registration. No, he was already registered on both. It's going to nullify the connection with the other. So once he's not connected with the other, now he's only registered on one. Oh, if he's registered on one carbon Pesach, now we can eat it. Beautiful. Bite. The next case, I think this was the last case in the Mishnah, if you had Evet Kanani that belonged to two partners, but one of them freed him, emancipated him, shtar shichrur, and now he becomes like a full-fledged yid. The half of him is Jewish. The other half is called half a Jew. Halachically, there is a half a Jew, an Evet Kanani. An Evet Kanani that went to the mikvah, l'shem gerus, he had a milah, l'shem gerus. He's mechuyev to keep all of the mitzvahs that women are mechuyev to keep, including we're learning our sugya that women are obligated to bring Pesach Rishon for sure. So the Mishnah says that if the master brings it for him, right, he can't eat from his master's carbon Pesach. And why is that? I'm going back in Nashi in the Mishnah, because the mistame, no, it's Rashi is also writing that there's a solution. The solution would be when this Chatzi Yeva tells the master, have me in mind for my free half. I know we spoke it out different in the Mishnah, but we spoke it out the way the Gemara is going to read it. But if the master never got the reshus from that half servant, half free man, that he should include the half-free part of him. No, the master has in mind all of the things that he owns, including his avadim. So the Chatzi Evet Shabai was automatically included. The Tzadachedus was not automatically included. And therefore he can't eat it. You have to be registered. All of you has to be registered. Says the Gemara, what do we infer from our Mishnah? That Mishal Rabbi Huda lo yoichel. But what happens if he brings it for himself? So l'choira abol mishal atzmai, if he brings it for himself, then he could eat it. Now that's a problem. Yeah, I know, Rabbi Chen, you brought this up. When we learned the Mishnah, I said that he cannot eat it from himself either. We'll see that in a moment. That's really the maskana. But our Mishnah seems to be implying that if he brings it for himself, he can. Now the question is, how can he bring it? He doesn't own that Sad Avdu Shaboy. It's not his. So he doesn't have the rights to register himself when he doesn't own it. So aside of it, how do you explain it? More, even a bigger question, it contradicts a Braisa. V'hatanya. Lo yoichel loy mishaloi v'loy mishal Rabbi. So answers the Gemara loy kasha. Kan Commissioner Rishoina. The Braisa is following the initial opinion of Beis Hillel, as we'll explain. And tak indeed, before Beis Hillel changed their minds, we'll speak this out in a moment, that this person cannot bring it for himself. We already explained the master can't bring it because the bestama, he's not including the tzad chedu shaboy. But the chatzi ben choden for sure cannot bring it for himself because he doesn't own the tzad avdu shaboy. Can't read it. But our Mishnah and Taka, we made a good inference that allows for him to bring it for himself is following the final decision of Beis Hillel. Beis Hillel changed their mind regarding the persona of a chatzi ben choden. And the Tanan, guys, we learned this so many times. Let's review it. Misha chetzi eved v'chatzi ben choden. First of all, let's speak about technically, financially, how does that work? So two people own an eved Kanani. One of them gave the eved Kanani a shtar shiur. So he belongs 50% to himself, 50% to his master. So so when he goes to work, who does he work for? So first of all, they made a simple system. We're speaking here about a financial system. That what? That we alternate days. We say that on Sunday he belongs only to his master. Monday he belongs fully to himself. Not that halachically he's free on Monday, but we when it comes to dinner de mamayna, when you alternate days, it's fair because one day fully for the master, one day fully for himself. So technically he gets to work. So Beis Shammai says if you only would have been looking at the financial, whom does he serve, when does he serve, then it's a solution, but that's only a solution for the master. Right? Beis Shammai yoimim daf peichesam and beis tikantem es Rabbi. You solve the dilemma for his master, meaning the master doesn't lose anything. He doesn't lose anything by him having him on alternate days. However, it solved the financial personal question, but there is a deeper question that this person has, and alternating days does not solve it at all. Now, what's the issue? How can he get married? And the Gemara explains, or the Braisa here explains, why may he never get married? Lisa shivcha ene yachol. Because only an Evet Kanani is allowed to marry a Shifcha Kananis. Because a full-fledged Jew may not have a relation even with a Shifcha Kananis, even though she's also quasi-Jewish. The only exception would be an Evet Ivri if the Pashas HaShavua, if when he entered his servitude, he was already married. Lisa Bas Choden, let him marry a free Jewish woman. No. Eni Yoch, Shadain Chetzrei Eved. What is he going to do? Interestingly, parenthetically, you have a similar challenge today. Whenever a Jew is on the process of converting, it's the same thing. Really, they cannot have a real social life because they're not Jewish yet. But so they can't marry a Jew. On the other hand, they can't date a non-Jew. They're going to become Jewish, but that's something temporary. They are in a process of converting. Here, this person has this status. So you're going to say, well, if you can't get married, so be it. No. As it says, in Yeshaya, the world was not created to remain desolate. God wants for there to be a populated world. And everyone asks, why doesn't Chazal bring over here the first mitzvah in the Torah, Pru'uravu? Right, these are the famous questions from which one of the famous answers is that Pru'uravu is a mitzvah on the Gavra. And maybe since he is a Chetzi Eved, Chetzi Ben Choden, and he's not allowed to marry anyone, so maybe God did not command him to have children. He's not allowed to. L'sheves Yitzhara is a mitzvah on the outcome. It's a mitzvah on the Chefza. The world has to be habitated. The world has to be settled with human beings everywhere. Oh, so that has to happen. So to tell him that we're not going to accept that he's exempted from the Shabbos Yitzhara. Ella, because of that, we force his master. And the master has to emancipate him. He's worth money, so we don't force the master to have financial loss. The case of it's for the master not to lose the half of ownership. He's going to have to pay money. How will he have money? If he doesn't have money, he writes an IOU or give the cash, borrow money. There's no financial loss, but the master must emancipate him. That was Shitas Beis Shammai. And now says the Gemara, they concluded, they agreed with Beis Shammai, and therefore, let's come back to our sugya before we learn to Tosfos. So, Mishnah Achroina, that's the Braisa, since Chazal are demanding of the master to free him, like Rashi writes, the last Rashi in Peches Amud Aleph, I'm reading the last Rashi, Hoyel ubiyodeinu l'shachraroi harehu kib ben choyren. But since halacha demands for him to be freed, we view him as if he's already free. And yes, when he registers himself, not only for sure can he do it for the half that he owns, but he now has the right even to register the half that's still enslaved, because the Torah is demanding for that half to become free as well. Beautiful. Okay, now I want to read one part of the top Tosfos. These are big sugyas. Let's not forget that when you own an Evet Kanani, the Torah writes in Parshas Bahar, Lo olam bohem ta'avodu, which means that there's a positive mitzvah not to free the slave. So the question is, why are we forcing the master to free him? Because the Chatzi ben Choyren cannot fulfill the Chatzi Evet Chatzi ben Choyren, right? Don't forget that L'Sheves Yitzhak is also a mitzvah on the Goyim. That's another reason why we bring that pasuk, that he's obligated to do the mitzvah of procreating. So isn't that the typical concept of that we don't force one Jew to sin for the other Jew to have a schus? Right? We don't say chatei b'shvil sheyiska chaveiroi. The third line on top Tosfos. And the answer of Tosfos speaks about the mitzvah rabbah. The mitzvah rabbah of having children trumps the asay of lo'olam tavodu. Other Rishonim say that the whole lo'olam b'hem tavodu is only if there is no purpose for freeing him. But what did we have the story in Brachas that we were missing a minion, right? I think it was Rabbi Gamliel, and he freed Tavi Avdoi in order for him to be a part of the minion. Right? That's not the mitzvah.
Is that an actual prohibition?
That's
not an actual commandment prohibition to not free a slave.
That's correct. Now, I just want to clarify something over here. It's a positive, it's a negative, it's a prohibition that's extrapolated from a positive commandment that forever you should enslave them. When it comes to the whole topic of slavery, just to take one little step back over here, when we speak about slaves, we have to know, how did someone become a slave? Now, what is unethical in slavery, Baruch, this is very important. People challenge us, we have to have the right words, is they say slavery is unethical. How did the Torah condone it? And here you're hearing it's a mitzvah to always be in possession of them. Whoa, people are confusing mamash apples and oranges. In the 10 Commandments, it says, do not steal. You know what that do not steal refers to in the 10 Commandments? Not the money. We're not allowed to steal money, but that's written many other times in the Torah. Thou shalt not steal means you cannot take a human being and forcefully take away their freedom. That's prohibited. And that's, if someone does it, it's capital punishment. Very important to know that. And furthermore, once an item is stolen, we are prohibited to buy an item that's stolen. That will include a person. We're speaking about a whole different type of slavery. If a person has the right to sell themselves into slavery, they do that as a last resort. Right? You think about any employment to a certain degree. A person is giving up their freedom from 9 to 5. It's not their passion. It's not going to be ultimately their profit in order for them to get the livelihood that they need. That the Torah gives us the right. I don't have the right to I can even sell my blood. I give you an example. I should donate my blood, but there are certain parts of us that we own. Now, if a person opts to become someone else's slave because they're going to get a lump sum money, that's not an unethical slavery. There are many rules that you can't abuse them. That is what we're talking about. If you own such a slave, you should not free them. Okay, that's a very important clarification that's needed. People get confused. Why didn't the Torah outlaw? The Torah outlawed slavery, my friends, in the 10 Commandments, in the unethical slavery. And in the slavery of option, we still live in a world that there are many things that we subject ourselves right now for financial gain or for other gains. And I have that right. I have to balance what works for me.
It's
Okay,
wonderful.
Mishnah. This is Mamish Moededik. Says the Holy Mishnah. Ha'omer la'avdoi. If a person tells his, and here we're speaking about whether it is an Evet Kanani or an Evet Ivri, I can appoint you to bring my Korban Pesach. Guys, not every Jew has to be in the Azara when they slaughtered the Korban Pesach. Even though, yes, miracles happened, but just think about if there was 1,200,000 animals, so it's daiva hoiser that there was a nest that you had those people in the Azara. Not at one time in 3 groups, that's still huge amounts of people. Everyone that's registered doesn't have to be there. Let's say we'll have our own Korban Pesach. One of us will have the schus of taking the physical animal in the Azara. They will be representing us when the animal is slaughtered, but we have to all eat it together. Okay, so here you have a person that tells his Eved, I'm sitting comfortably in my apartment in Yerushalayim, but you're going to go to the Harapah, you're going to go to the Beis Hamikdash, you're going to bring it. Now hold on, a Korban Pesach can come either from a tzeh, or from a goat, right? From a kid, or from a lamb. So Pesach, and the owner did not specify which animal type. So says the Mishnah that the Eved or the Shliach gets to make that choice, and everything is fine. Shachat gedi yoichal, shachat tele yoichal. The Gemara is going to ask Shita. The Gemara is going to speaking out the Gemara already. Not the Mishnah is including a scenario where let's say you, the master, you, the balabas, every year you ate lamb. You like lamb, right? That was that whole machlokes between the king and the queen. What's tastier? We just had that. So if you ate lamb every year, one might have thought that even though you did not specify you wanted to have a lamb. No, doesn't matter. If you did not tell the Eved what to bring, whatever he brought is valid. Next. Shachat gedivitle, the Eved was never told which animal type. So you know what he did? He says, I'll bring both. But guys, let's remember the principles of this Pedic. You may not be registered on two Pesachs. You have to belong only to one. So what does the Mishnah say? Yoichal min harishon. Find out whichever one was brought once, and Shalom al Yisrael. And let me add something. And what happens to the second? You have to burn it. Because since the first was the Pesach, that means that whether it's just the master and his bias were registered or whoever, the second one had no people registered on it. So it was slaughtered. There was no oichlav. If there's no oichlav, we learned that only loyla oichlav, then it's not that invalid. Next case. Shachach ma omer loy raboy. The master told him whether a tli or a seh. The Eved forgot. So Ketzad Yaseh, what should he do? Zok the Mishnah. Yishchat levig, he has to shech 2 animals, and he should make the following stipulation: Im gedi amar li rabbi. If my master told me a gedi, so then gedi shaloi. This gedi is I'm fulfilling the shlichus, and the tle is mine. The im tle amar li rabbi. So then we must be speaking about an Eved Ivri, by the way, because an Eved Kanani doesn't have, we'll see soon, doesn't have how. There's 2 questions. How does he even own 2 animals? We're going to get to that in the Gemara. But then there's another issue, the last sugya. Doesn't he automatically belong in the group of his rabbi? Even if he makes a protest, the answer is not an Eved Ivri. Eved Ivri has the right to make his own. Okay. Read the words inside. If he told me to bring a shepsele, then hatleshaloi, then the lamb is his, and the kid, the goat is mine. Shalom al Yisrael. Now the final case in the Mishnah. Not only did the Eved forget which one of the 2, when he brought back both later, the master also forgot which one he told him to shech for him. You guys, you cannot eat a Korban Pesach if you were not counted on it. Now, both of them are Pesachs, one for the Rabbi, one for the Eved. But I don't know whether I was registered on this animal or on that animal. So no one can eat either. Because no one can eat it. However, here's the Chiddush. But they are exempt of making a Pesach Sheni. Let's read Rashi around 11, 12 lines from the top of the Amid. Says Rashi, why? Because the lo yidia, we don't know which animal belongs to which owner, to which group. The high. And the Eina Pesach Nechol El. So if they both have to get burnt, so then they should both have to bring Pesach Sheni? No. Upeturim and Pesach Sheni, because since during the Shechita and during the Zrika, Ma'al Yasihi, it was good. Which we're learning here in the Mishnah that the owner forgot later, more details in the Gemara, whether you need to say that or not. So Chada Ahai v'Chada Ahai, when the Avodah was done, no, one was for the master, one was for the Eved. God knows which one was for which. V'kamei Shemaya Galia. That's enough to say that they fulfilled their obligation. No, it's the fact that they actually don't eat it, guys. That we already had enough Ein Ches. Remember Ein Ches Amid Beis, Amar Rav Gidel Amar Rav, and we had I think Rav Nassan and we had Rabbi Yeshua. That Achil is not Ma'akev b'di'evet. But beyond that, you have to do the Zrika. The Zrika is Ma'akev. You have to. No, that's fine. Klapi Shemayim Galia. We're going to apply the Klapi Shemayim Galia more in the Gemara. Okay, we're going to go systematically, beautifully on every clause in the Mishnah. The Gemara begins in clause number 1, that the master never specified what animal type. So let me, whichever one is good. Pshita? No, answers the Gemara, not Pshita, like we explained. That Shachat Gedi Yoichal, the Balabas will eat the Gedi. Afal Gav the Ragel Betleh. Every year prior he ate the lamb, right? Or Shachat Tle Yoichal Afal Gav the Ragel. That's the Chiddush. Since now he didn't specify, so then whichever one the Eved chooses will be valid. Case number 2, my friends. Case number 2 was that since the master did not specify, the Eved said, I'm covering all my bases, I'm shechting both. Shachad Gedi, Vitleh, so which one is valid? The first one. Yerchel Menarishon. Upa, fragt die Gemara v'hatanya, ein in den Alshnem Pesachim ke'echad. Listen here. If you hold Bereda, there's no issue. Right? This is, obviously, this Braisa does not subscribe to Bereda. The master, the Eved, didn't have in mind only the first of Pesach, because then how would he be allowed to bring the second? It was brought, both were brought for the Rabbi. How can you now say that you're going to eat from the first? Again, guys, if you hold Bereda, there's no Kasha B'chlal. But if there's no Bereda, how does it work? So here's a Gavaldike nuance, that Masnisin b'melech u'malka. Or today you can say on an American Jew, on people that have tremendous abundance. When a person doesn't care whether it's a teleh or whether it's a gedi, then they agree to both. Then of course, whichever one was done first, that is where they were registered, and then they are removing the second themselves from the second one. If a person is makbid, now, if the Eved only brought one, so be it, like we learned in the first case in the Mishnah, because he only brought one. But the moment he brings 2 and the owner is makbid, now you got yourself a problem. Because maybe if he really wanted the second, then you can't say he belongs to the first. But on the other hand, he's also registered on the first. You're stuck. But when we're speaking about people that are not particular, so they don't mind whichever one. Whichever one added to it allows them to be initially registered on both, and now they're registered on the first, because you can't be registered on the second one as well. And it's Shalom Al Yisrael, and this Ve'hatanya is binichusa, as we learned, that Einim Nin Al Shnei Pesachim Ke'echad. You gotta pick. However, Umaisa b'melech u'malka, that Sha'amru Lavdeim, they told their servants, first white line, Su'u, V'shachatu Aleinu Pesach, and they never specified what animal type. And the Yotzav V'shachtu Aleim, Shnei Pesachim. Right, they brought a kid and they brought a lamb. Bo V'shalos HaMelech, Upa, which one should we prepare? Which one do you want? Amar Lahem, I'm not going to make that choice. My queen will make that choice. L'chu V'shalos HaMalka. Bo V'shalos HaMalka, so they asked the queen. Amar Lahem, so the queen answered, go ask the Amar Lahem, L'chu V'shalos Rabban Gamliel, the head of the Sanhedrin. So they went and they asked Rabbi Gamliel. And we'll just say that it's very significant. So Amar Lahem, so he responded that since Melech, Malko Melech, the datum kala aleim, da'as kala, we learned this in Hasidus, has many applications. Sometimes weak das or a light das means that there is a lack of a connection between the moyach and the leiv. And that's part of our avodah. That's zera behema. Datum kala in this context means that they're not particular. Same concept. They don't care. Dafke because they're wealthy. They don't care which one they're going to have. So therefore, they are connected to both, but you can only be registered on one. So whichever one came first is good. And therefore, that's the case of our Mishnah, Yochlu min harishon. However, if you are not in the mindset of a malka and a melech, or a melech and a malka, if you're not datan kalan, if you do care, then you think got yourself a problem. Because since you cannot be registered on two, and they shech the two, and they shech the two, so you never had the attitude from the beginning, whichever one comes first. You wanted something specific. If you say ein breira, then you can't have either. And now that we said a story about the king and the queens, weiter. V'shul pamachas, there was another story that says halta'a bebeis hamitpachayim, that in the kitchen of the palace, right, in the beis hamitpachayim normally means a shlachta. Here it means we're in the place where they were preparing the meat. They found a lizard. Now, 1 second, Chevra. We're speaking about a dead lizard, carcass of a lizard. Halta is one of the Shmoyne Shiratzim that when they are dead, they give off Tumah. No, we're not saying that the Melech and the Malka were Kahanim or Levim. The food was not Dafka Truma or Maisa Sheni, but many people ate Chulin Betaro. So, L'choida, if there's a dead lizard in your pot of meat, the food is Tameh. And if it would be Tameh, they would discard it. So Bikshu Latami Kala Saud, they wanted to make the whole Saud. I mean, whatever had contact with that halta'a should become tummy. But before they threw out the food, before they gave it to people that are not medagdek to eat chulan bitara, they asked the king, go ask the queen. So he gave a very, Rav has to be practical. It's not that he picked a halacha out of his hat that no one knew. He knew that sometimes a creature appears dead because he's in contact with a lot of heat. And the moment you cool off the creature, all of a sudden vitality comes back. So he asked him, Beit HaMitbachayim. Beit HaMitbachayim doesn't mean the kitchen. It means the pot that you found the lizard in. Was that pot roiseach or tzoinen? We're not speaking about imparting a flavor. We're speaking about tumantara, contact. We'll see the hot and the cold was about why does he look dead? Was it hot or cold? So they told him it was hot. It was hot? And go and throw on the lizard that you think is dead a cup of cold water. And they didn't know why, but they did what Rabbi Gamliel said to do. And what happened? It began to move, it began to squirm. It was alive the whole time. It was like in a comatose because of the heat. It was alive. So the Gemara learns the Musar Haskell that Nimsa Melech Talui b'Malka. If you think you're a king, then you're going to lean on your queen, and she will determine in the home these decisions. And the Nimsa is Malka. When the husband is machabed his wife, that will inspire his wife to be machabed the Rebbe. Talui b'Rabbi Gamliel. So why does it come out that the entire Su'udah depends on Rabbi Gamliel? Everything comes from God, but how does the hashpah come down? It goes through the tzaddik, it goes through a Rebbe. And then when it goes further down into one's life, right, we have this in Bava Metzia Daf Nun Tes. What's the chazal over there? That Omer Rabbi Chelbe Ein Abrach Mitzoi Bebayis Ella B'Shvil Ishtoi. It goes through one's wife. And then from one's wife, it goes into one's life. Moiridik. So that's the Seder. So it's Rabbi Gamliel, the Malka, the Melech, and everything that they are in touch with in Olam Hazeh. Weiter. Says the Gemara, referring back to the Mishnah, Shachach Masha Omar Loi Rabbi. So this Eved makes a stipulation. But mine, one should be mine. How does the Eved own anything? Shali, Masha Kana Eved, Kana Rabbi. In fact, I'm sorry, we were speaking about an Eved Kanani here. I take back what I said. We're speaking about an Eved Kanani. Masha Kana Eved, Kana Rabbi. Omar Abaye, that there's an exception. There is a time that an Eved can own something without the master automatically owning it. That that this Eved goes to a shepherd who the master buys a lot from him. So the shepherd, so to say, would want to service the master. He owes him, so to say. The master is a good client. The master wants to help the shepherd, who is a provider, right? The customer is a king, would want to benefit here the rabbi. And the Eved explains to the shepherd what happened. Why are we doing that? The Eved doesn't have money. We want for the shepherd to gift the Eved one of these two animals. But when you give a gift to an Eved stam, the default is if he owns it, the master owns it. But if when you give a gift, you say, I'm giving it a gift to you on the condition that your master doesn't have any ownership, then the master has no ownership. He doesn't even know which one, because the Eved is explaining to the shepherd exactly what happened, but that's the solution. So now one Gedi will belong to the Eved. And again, if we're speaking about an Eved Kanani, even though the default is that the Eved Kanani belongs to the master, and he may not even protest against it, but in such a scenario, the rabbi wants for the Eved to be his own person. The rabbi is going to sort of say, gift him that, just like you can give him an animal, so he can also register himself on that animal, whichever one it is, because the rabbi wants for that to happen, for there to be a tikkun here in the rabbi's Pesach. Let's go back to Shachach Rabbi Masha Amarloi, the final case in the Mishnah. The master himself forgot which one this is, so the Mishnah gave this chiddush that neither can eat any of them, but none of them have to bring a Pesach Sheni. So Amar Abaye, we're limiting the laws of the Mishnah. When do we say that they're yotzem? Because the master himself forgot after the zrika. What is that? What's the benefit of that? Oh, the beidna, the izrik dam, then he know which one this is. So it was slaughtered for people that will eat it. Abul shachach, but if the master forgot even before the zrika, meaning that the chi izrik dam loy have a chazil achila, then chayav and laso is pesach sheni. So says Abai. Says the Gemara, I want you to know that Ika the Masnila Braisa, there are others that say that this statement of Abaye was not on our Mishnah, was one on a whole different case of the Braisa. We'll treat the final case we learned today, which is a phenomenal case. And that will continue on Daf Pei Tes. Now listen to what happened. 5 different groups brought a Pesach. Everything was done beautifully. Then they skinned the animal. When each group looked at their skin, they noticed from the skin that there is a wart, a yabelis. Their animal was a balmum, their animal is not good. Now, normally, if our group sees that blemish on the hide, oops, we got to bring another carbon. If, God forbid, it's too late, Pesach Sheni. Problem is that the 5 skins got mixed up. One of the 5 animals were not good, but we don't know from which group. First, the hides got mixed up. And now you find on one of these hides, Yabeles, Ba'achad Mehem. So first of all, one of these karbanis was a balmum. But here the Braisa says, no one has to make a Pesach Sheni. And on that said Abaye, that they are all exempt from Pesach Sheni, same concept, because the Be'itna, the Izrik Dam, Nia, have a Chazal Achila. Chazal Achila means 4. Not all 5, but at least 4 of the 5 knew it wasn't their height. So no group was able to eat their carbon Pesach Rishon, then all of them are chayv to make a Pesach Sheni. So says the Gemara, these 2 versions of on what din did Abaye make his comment, man, the masne amas nisan. In our Mishnah, the disqualification was not in the animal, a lesser disqualification. And yet Abaye is saying that if the disqualification happened before Zrika, they have to bring a Pesach Sheni. Then certainly Abaye would make the same comment on the Braisa, because there the problem is inherent in the animal. However, man the Masna Braisa, Avola Masnisin, Lav Dafka Abaye would say that before the Zrika, they already forgot. But Kivan the Kashedanino, since the animals themselves were good, meaning that potentially, theoretically, had the master remembered before the Zrika. And now these are the words that we read in Rashi. So even if they forgot before Zrika, Kape, Shmaya, Galia, Gavaldik. And therefore, even before Zrika, not the rabbi nor the Eben have to bring a Pesach Sheni. And now we will continue, God willing, and the next year we'll be analyzing the Braisa. It doesn't make sense regarding these 5 groups, why would they not have to bring a Pesach Sheni? We'll explain the problem, and we're going to have a very interesting solution, just the kernel. Not that they're not obligated to bring a Pesach Sheni. Theoretically, they're obligated, but they cannot. So they will not bring a Pesach Sheni, even though maybe that person, or collectively, one of those 5, taka did not yotze the mitzvah of Pesach that year, God willing to be continued.
Rabbi,
Sunday at 6.
Just a quick question. What's the difference with an Eved Ivri? How would this all apply to an Eved Ivri? Is there a difference with the whole Shachach? Why are we talking dafka about Eved Kanani, and how would it apply to an Eved Ivri?
No, because Masha Kana Eved Kana Rabbi. That's why I thought the Mishnah was Eved Ivri, but Masha Kana Eved Kana Rabbi is not said by an Eved Ivri at all.
So the Eved Ivri is allowed to have possessions?
The Eved Ivri has possessions. Eved Ivri has sometimes more possessions than the master. It's like you hiring a worker here in America. He has more rights than you. He's a bigger partner in your business than you. He can sue you, not you, someone else. Yeah,
So the whole shachak, this whole thing has to apply to an Eved Kanani dafka.
Wait, the kasha, it goes to Eved Kanani. I was just wondering, if it's an Eved Kanani, how can he have his own carbon? We learned on Amadal that he's automatically even against Shaloi Medatoi. Because the master wants for him to have his own carbon. If not, no one will be